I also see it as it was the deepest wound of my life these past couple years. But now my prayer is that as I've gained strength through that wound, and that wound is no longer oozing and bleeding all over, that it's a wound that God can use as a well of hope for others, because others that are in the raw state of their wounds, to say there is hope, that God is there. He sees you. He is with you. He is sitting with you right there in the ashes of your pain. And this pain will be used for good, for your good and for His glory. It doesn't mean it'll feel good, but it will be used for good.
This episode of The Recovery Couch is brought to you by Greg Swartz at Remax Victory and Affiliates. Greg brings heart, hustle, and honesty to every deal. Call Greg at 937-477-8975 today and tell him The Recovery Couch sent you. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Recovery Couch, where we deliver unapologetic, real, faith-based stories and messages covered by the blood of Jesus. This is a space where we speak from the heart without filters, because Psalm 139 verse 4 reminds us that God knows our words before we ever speak them. And Romans 5:8 tells us that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's why The Recovery Couch exists, to meet people exactly where they are. Because here, we believe when you offer someone a space to be real, you're offering them a place to heal. I'm so excited about today's conversation. I met Niemah recently, and we had a discussion about her amazing testimony. It is so real, so authentic, and just unbelievably miraculous. So let's welcome to the show, Niemah. Niemah, how you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Thank
you for having me.
Man, it's my pleasure. So start the story. We're ready.
Start the story. Wow. My story, but God's story. So my story began in 1964, Jerusalem. A 15-year-old Palestinian girl was pregnant, not by her choice, and she had escaped a small village, her small village up near the West Bank, down to Jerusalem, where she gave birth to me. She had escaped an honor killing, and she gave birth to me. I was then placed in a Jewish baby home, and 2.5 years later, adopted by American Christians. And just in that 2.5 years, the miracles that had to take place that just revealed God's divine intervention, God's divine orchestration, His protection, His providence, His perfect timing, all wrapped up in just 2.5 years for the sake of a small orphaned Palestinian baby.
So let me ask this quick question, Niemah. So first of all, this is in the Holy Land.
Absolutely.
You're talking about Jerusalem. You're talking about
Yes.
where Jesus walked and preached. But you say honor killing. Can you explain to us what an honor killing is?
Yes, sadly, it is. And I definitely want to make sure it's not all Arab nations. It's not all Arab cultures, but it is definitely throughout the world in different places where there is a belief system within radical Islam that if a woman, as you know, women have very few rights in many of these countries, even today. And if they even look at a man, what can be perceived as looking at a man wrong or being provocative in any way, that can justify lashings or even an honor killing. So to be pregnant and unwed was a death sentence. My birth mother, she was pregnant at 14 years old. And sadly, usually it's the father and the men in the family who lead the charge with the honor killing. Typically what they do is they bury a woman up to her chest in sand. Her arms are under the sand, and they cover her head, and they begin throwing stones at her until she takes her last breath. If it's not the men in the family, it could be the men in the community. And this often happens while the women are standing around cheering it on. And so when her family realized that she was pregnant because her father loved her dearly. He knew that they had to get her out of the community. And so they ended up calling Israeli authorities. It was Israeli authorities who came to the village because by God's grace, they lived just outside of the West Bank. Had they been on the other side, they would have been under Islamic law. But because of where they lived, literally just within a mile or two of the West Bank, but in Israeli territory, they were under Israeli authority. And so that ended up being one of my main protections. And it was Israeli authorities who took me away down, I'm sorry, who took my birth mother away down to Jerusalem, where I was kept safely where she was kept safely till she was ready to give birth to me.
So the Palestinian woman that you started the conversation with, this is your birth mother, and she's basically running from her death sentence for many years.
Yes. Yes.
So they make it to Jerusalem thanks to the Israeli government. And what
Yes.
happens from there?
Well, it's interesting. I'd love to just share. Her name is Salima. And what her name means in Arabic is to be unharmed. And it's just a testament to how God's hand of protection was upon her from the moment she was born. And her mother named her. Her name became a legacy of her protection, thus my protection. Because when she got to Jerusalem, she was kept under the Ministry of Social Welfare, run by Jews. And then when she was ready to give birth, I was born in a hospital called Bikur Holim Hospital, and then placed pretty much immediately into what was called the Vitso Baby Home, which is a Jewish orphanage. And it was there where I was cared for by very dedicated Jewish nurses. And one nurse in particular, her name was Ida. It was also a nursing school. And so Ida was placed there, and I was her first assignment. She was just 18 years old. And what she would tell you, her words that she used, as she says, the minute that I saw you, I fell in love with your big brown eyes and dark hair. And I said, I am going to invest in this child. And she just took a special love for me. She had grown up in an orphanage herself her entire life. She was left abandoned at a doorstep, and she was determined that she did not want me to have that same fate. She was a Christian. She grew up in an orphanage run by a Baptist home. And so she began a relentless search for a family for me.
So there's a common theme so far in this story, and that common theme is Christians.
Yes. Yes.
Gosh, this is unbelievable. So,
Yes.
18-year-old nurse named Ida sees a little bit
Yes.
of herself in you and doesn't
Yes.
want for you what she had to experience and live through. So
Yes.
she pours into you. So what happens from there?
So she would tell you that I was in a crib basically 24/7 because there were other babies to tend to. But she would stay after work, after the days that she worked on her shift. She would buy me little clothes and little shoes, and she would take me outside because otherwise we would never be taken outside. And she just wanted me to breathe in the air, feel the wind on my face, feel the grass. She spent as much time, but she still knew she couldn't give me. She was 18 and single, so she would not be allowed to adopt me. So she met this family who were Americans stationed there in the Air Force in Tel Aviv, Pete and Dixie Gearhart. They had been unable to have children themselves, so they had already adopted a little boy and girl, and they felt their family was complete. They were stationed in Israel, as my dad served in the Air Force, and they met Ida because they needed a babysitter once in a while. They had met her at church, and so she started babysitting. And every time she was in their house, she just kept saying, "You need to come see this baby." And they kept saying, "No, we have our complete family. We're all done." But she was relentless. She was determined to find a family for me. And so finally. And if you know Ida, you can get why she would be very persistent. And they finally came to meet me one day, still figuring they were doing it just to appease Ida. But my mom would tell you that the moment she laid eyes on me, she knew that I was meant to be theirs. And that began the long, very difficult process of adoption because of laws that were set in place. And it really looked like an impossible human task. But as we know, with God, nothing is going to be impossible. And it wasn't in my case.
Amen. So Pete and Dixie, a family at Tel Aviv, they know Ida, and Ida convinces them to adopt you. Tell us about the laws and the difficulties that they had to go through in order to complete this adoption. And then, what happened after that with these laws, and how did they do it?
So initially, there's a law that Palestinians, Arabs in general, they do not even believe in what we understand as adoption. So they have a word called kafala, which is guardianship. So if there is a baby in need, they will never receive the full rights as an adopted child in a Palestinian family. It will just be they are under guardianship. So that alone is just incredible that by God's grace, I was under Israeli authority when I was placed in that Jewish baby home. So I was not under the laws that said we don't believe in adoption. But then what my parents faced was there was a law that you could not adopt a child outside of your religion. And my parents were determined. I could almost see them being willing to go before the judge and say, well, yeah, we'll raise her under Islam, no problem. But they trusted God from the beginning that I was meant to be theirs. They had been stationed in France and Germany, the US, so they had friends literally around the world praying for this situation. And when they went to the consulate and went before the judge, he did not even look up and see their faces, which they would have seen that they were Americans or white. He just looked at the paperwork, he stamped it and passed it on. And they were never asked that question and they never had to answer it. But that same law was going through the Senate legislation over in New York. That's where they were working with the attorneys because that's where they were from. And once they got through this hurdle in Israel, I have a letter from the judge that had been written to my mom and dad. And that letter basically said, as of now, this law, it was the same law about you can only adopt a child in the same religion. And it basically said to my parents, at this time, it does not look like the adoption can go through. But if it passes here in the Senate or wherever it was in the legislature, we will let you know. But my parents didn't. They proceeded. And to this day, in all honesty, I do not know how they did this, but they were able to obtain this document called a laissez-passer, and that's in French. And basically, it was a document that was produced. And there was a section on that document that asked for nationality. And my birth certificate, it says both Muslim and Arab. And yet on this document, it is written undetermined. And because of that one word, undetermined, it allowed my parents to take me into any country as a visitor. And so when my parents, I was 2.5 years old at this point, they were literally able to put me on an airplane as a visitor. Like, could you just imagine that today, just trying to take a toddler somewhere and say, oh, they're just a visitor? But somehow they went with, and that document was gold. And when they went to the consulate, the embassy in Maryland, that's where they were going to be stationed next, my dad was. And that judge just looked at that piece of paper and he looked up at my dad and he said, "You must have friends in high places." And that's where my dad was able to say, "Yes, I have the highest friend in the highest place." And then within the next, well, it's interesting, by 1967, my adoption was official and complete. And when you look at God's timing, if you know about the history going on over there in Israel, in 1964, when this small miracle was taking place, where Arabs, Jews, and Christians were working together for the sake of this small orphan, they were at odds with each other. The hostility and the anger and all that was developing and the division, because Israel had gained statehood in 1948 and the Palestinians felt displaced, and they were displaced. And so, because they felt that was their land. Well, 1964, things were really rising to a critical level. Well, here it is, 1967. I am safely out of the country and in the United States. And the Six-Day War breaks out in 1967. So, there again, just God's divine, miraculous intervention with his timing to have me out of that danger zone, um, and safely in America in a new family.
So, Niemah, the guardianship, you were under Israeli authority, making adoption super difficult. Pete and Dixie trusted God, regardless of all of the odds being stacked against them, to adopt you. Then this laissez-passer document uh, said that you were non-determined on your nationality, which ended up being gold. And in 1967, your adoption is complete. Not only safely are you in America, but legally you're in America. What do you think the odds are of all of these things happening?
Well, that's interesting you asked that, because I'm actually in the process of writing a book. And one of the things I had to do on my book proposal was to find other books that are similar to what I want to write. In doing that research, and I did a deep dive. If someone else can find one, that's great. I could not find one book of a Palestinian adoption, because sadly, if a Palestinian would get pregnant in my circumstance or out of wedlock or an unwanted baby, they would take care of that by taking care of the mother, by killing her through honor killing. And if a baby does survive, there's just guardianship. So I have yet to find a story of another Palestinian who has been safely adopted and adopted by American Christians.
So we're talking slim to none,
Yes.
1% or less.
Yes.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So the story's not over. You're in America. You're safe. Now you have this upbringing. Pete and Dixie raise you. And at what point do you find out? I know you call them mom and dad. At what point is it disclosed to you that this was an adoption and all of these facts that you've already shared with us took place?
I was, I knew from as long as I could remember that I was adopted. I probably didn't know all the details. We didn't have a lot of details, though, honestly. I just knew that she was young. She was 14 when she got pregnant, 15 when she had me. So I understood. I know a lot of adoptees struggle with feeling given up, rejected. I didn't have that struggle because I understood my birth mother was so young. And I grew up in the church. And so, growing up in the church, I literally was almost treated like this little child celebrity because I was born in Jerusalem. People thought that was so cool. I walked on the same ground that Jesus walked. And so I really grew up feeling very celebrated. My adoption was a very positive story. So I definitely didn't struggle with a lot of what I do hear that adoptees struggle with, as far as why did my parents give me up or why did my mother give me up? I understood that. And so I grew up, I think that I felt so a part of my family that I did not I didn't think of myself often as being adopted. In the secular world, my name made me stand out. People would hear Niemah and right away, I mean, you could imagine kids always make fun of kids for any reason. So I did get made fun of for my name, and I did look different because I grew up in a very white suburbia kind of neighborhood in New Jersey. So I did get, I did feel different, but it wasn't to the degree that it really affected me. And so growing up, it was very interesting when I met my husband. To give you an idea of how much I didn't really allow it to be on the forefront of my mind, when it was my birthday, he said to me, "I bet your birth mother is thinking about you today." That was honestly the first time I ever thought of that, which is kind of sad, but maybe that's a testament to how my parents made me feel so a part of their family that that thought truly never crossed my mind. And so as an adult, I did start to think more, and it was more out of curiosity. Who do I look like? I'm only 5 feet tall. Like, who gave me my short height? Like it was more that. But and I sometimes, like, maybe I'd watch an Oprah Winfrey show, and there was a guy on there that claimed he could connect any adoptee with their family. I reached out to that phone number, but they said Israel's one of the most difficult countries. They keep their records sealed. So my husband had emailed the Vitso home, the baby home, and it's a huge organization worldwide. It's actually stationed out of the UK, I believe. And he was emailing someone back and forth a little bit, but that kind of became a dead end. My one daughter traveled on a 3-week trip, and it ended up that she got the idea that either my birth mother probably was no longer alive or she was sent to Lebanon, and it was very dangerous there. So I really just got to the place of believing I, it was not meant to be that I would find her. It made me kind of sad, but I just really believed I would see her on the other side. I would see her in heaven, and that for whatever reason, God just did not allow me to ever connect to her.
This episode of the Recovery Couch is brought to you by JB Davis at South Dayton Toyota. For integrity, service, and unbeatable deals, call JB and his team at 513-267-5225 and tell them the Recovery Couch sent you. Let me ask you a question just to see if I can get us on a timeline here. So Pete and Dixie always were honest about where you came from and what the hoops they had to jump through in order to make this happen.
Yes.
And then eventually you meet your husband and you guys start the process after he says on your birthday, I bet your birth mother's thinking about you. At about what age are we now when you start thinking, okay, yeah, my birth mother might be thinking about me on my birthday? And then where you feel like you want to connect? What age are you when this is happening?
I was older again. I was most of maybe starting. I would say after my mother died. My mother died when I was just 38 years old. Like, I feel like she was taken too young. She was just 69. I never searched prior, I think because I was afraid it would hurt her. But after she died was when more I did that's when I did those, the Oprah, the Vitso home, and my daughter traveled over there. And it just came to the place of thinking I would never find her. And then my world pretty much was rocked when I was 58 years old, but it was not when I was searching for her. It just kind of happened accidentally.
Yeah, let's hear this.
So I was just sitting with my one daughter who had done Ancestry DNA probably 5 or 6 years prior. This was 3 years ago now. And she just thought, she hardly checked it. And I had done the Ancestry DNA too, but I hardly checked it. And she decided to just check it one day. And when she checked it, there were two first, second cousin relations. And they were two sisters that lived in the United States. And she started communicating with them. And that communication went on for a few weeks, but then it stopped because they said that their mother wanted them to have nothing to do with this communication. So in that time period, I was able to find another relative that I just call a secret informant, because to this day, that person wants to remain anonymous. And I want to respect that. And so I reached out to this individual 6 weeks after this all started, giving them the little bit of information I had, my birth mother's name, the hospital I was born in, the year I was born. And I said, I think that my birth mother there may be a relation to someone in your family. And within hours, I received a response through Facebook Messenger. There were no words. It was just a picture. It was a grainy picture, but it was of a woman's face in a white hijab. And that was my birth mother. And not only did I find out that what she looked like, but I found out that she was alive. And that began a 1.5 year dialogue that remained secret between this individual and I, feeding me a lot of information. A lot of the information was sad. I did find out that I was the product of rape, and that really sent me to a very, very dark place. As you can imagine, really struggled with identity. I went through a phase of not wanting to even look at myself in the mirror. The best way I describe it to people is I wanted to remove half of my being, just rid myself of half of who I was. And in finding that out also, in that time period, that was one of the really difficult things that I went through. And then another was through this process, I knew that certain family members here in the United States were keeping me away from her. And there were family members over there that were also trying to shield me from ever contacting her because they said that it was too dangerous. The same community that wanted to kill her when she was 14 years old, apparently it was still dangerous. But I didn't know any of that for sure. So I asked this secret informant, is there anything you can do? Is there anybody you can connect me with over there that can somehow try to find out what's really going on? So he had gotten me in touch with a man who runs an organization who tries to connect adoptees to their families. He was able to get me in touch with a private investigator. That private investigator was Jewish. So here again, you have Arabs, Jews, and Christians working together to try to get me to my birth mother, that same alliance. And she had to bring along with her someone who spoke Arabic. And so weeks went by, and this is now almost a year after me even finding out about her. But the pain of knowing she was out there and I was here and I couldn't get to her was just, it wrecked me. I was in such a dark season and a dark place. The best way to describe it is I just felt like this cloud of sadness and sorrow hung over me. And that's not who I am. I'm usually basically just very outgoing, happy person, the glass half full, not half empty. And I didn't even recognize who I was. And so these private investigators told me I could not even tell this secret informant what they were doing because that village that she was living in was controlled by a radical Islamic sheikh. And so they had to go to her under the guise of, it took weeks for them to even get to her. They would try to call her, and there was a nephew that kept her from even speaking to these private investigators. They were trying to call under the guise of Cancer Society because she had cancer. And so they decided one day they were just going to go. And so when they got to the village, they went into a market to ask, where does Salima live? Because they don't have addresses like we do here. And there was a man praying, so they didn't want to disturb him. They went outside and saw two women, and they said, do you know where Salima lives? And they first thing out of their mouth after 58 years, well, you know the rumors about her, don't you? Do you imagine that? 58 years. And they also told these two private investigators the man that was praying was her nephew. He was the nephew that would not give her the phone and was keeping them from reaching her. Had they said, "Do you know where Salima lives?" he would have interfered and been an obstacle. There again, God's direct divine intervention. And so they went to Salima's home, and a niece was there with her. So they knew they had to get the niece away. So one of the women, the investigators, brought her out to the car. They had a plant that they said they wanted to give to Salima on the Cancer Society's behalf. The other woman went in and she said to Salima, "I am here on behalf of your daughter." And Salima said, "I don't have a daughter." And they said, "The one you gave birth to in 1964. And it was at that moment that she almost fainted. She turned white as a ghost. And she became hysterical out of just sheer terror and fear that I would show up, that the community would find out. And so they had to try to calm her down. And they just, one of the really sad things was they wanted to show her a picture of me, and she just refused to look at it. And so I have the recording, I have the voice recording of that conversation. And it was very painful to hear her voice because she was so afraid. So there's part of me feeling like I made her so afraid. What she tucked away for 58 years suddenly was presented to her. So hearing that recording is hard. There's a moment in that recording, though, that I believe is a gift from God. It's a treasure to me. I hold it more valuable than anything I own. There was a moment when she talked about not only her cancer, but that she also had a heart condition. She had open heart surgery and had high blood pressure and some other heart issues. And I had only found out a few years prior, I apologize, accidentally found out through a visit to the hospital for something else that I had a heart condition and that I had a hole in my heart. And so the private investigator said to her, "Your daughter has a heart condition. She has a hole in her heart." And through all the crying and the hysteria that she was showing in her voice and that I heard, there was this moment that lasted maybe a second where she just said, "Oh." And it was just said so gently. There was a shift in her voice to a moment of calm. And I just hold on to that with everything because it was a moment that I felt that there was a connection and that if she was able to feel anything for me, it was in that moment. And I'll treasure that forever because it's really all I have of her.
Wow. So when you start the process of sending the private investigator and then they report back to you that she doesn't want contact, you go through a period of time where you just didn't even feel like yourself. And when they finally find your birth mother, they get this recording where she shows a moment of care, of love, of concern for you and your heart defect. How did that make you feel?
It's just everything. To this day, it's everything because they contacted her a couple more times. They asked if they could reach back out to her. And she said, "You can, but you cannot talk about this subject," meaning me. And so again, that they did call her the next day. And when they tried to bring the subject of me up, she got very, very upset. And so she feared so greatly that I would just show up. So I asked them to please assure her that I would not do that, that I would honor her request. And that was probably the hardest time period because I was wrestling with my identity, knowing how I was conceived. And I was wrestling with being rejected. Even though I understood it, I understood her fear. I understood the shame and that she still felt her life could be in danger. But no matter what, it still felt like rejection. It wasn't the outcome I had hoped. And so, but at the same time, I made a decision. Though I could have, often I thought about just get on a plane and go. Maybe if she sees you, it'll be different. But I truly felt like, in the same way she protected me when I was in her womb, it was now my turn to protect her. And while I believed I was doing the right thing, it was the most painful time of my life, because there she was, 5,000 miles away, and she was alive. And I found her when I wasn't even looking. And I think that's where I really wrestled with God. I always had a very strong faith. And while I'm so thankful that I never doubted God's goodness, I did question him and I wrestled with him. And I like to describe that I felt like I would just get in that arena and wrestle with him with all these unanswered questions. Why, God, would you bring me to her when I wasn't even looking, only to keep me from her? But I also like to say that the same hands that wrestled with him were the same hands clinging to him, because I didn't want to let go of him either, because he was literally carrying me through this time. And my birth mother, Salima, I reached out to this secret informant a few months again, saying, this is just so hard for me. Isn't there anything we can do? And he told me at that time, Salima is very sick. I don't think she has much longer. So that really set me into, what do I do? Do I really, if there was any time I felt like getting on a plane and going, it was then. So I reached out to the private investigator, the private investigator again. And they called her, and I have that recording. And that one was really hard to listen to because she sounded so sick. She truly sounded like a woman on her deathbed. But even then, she still did not want me coming. And she at least heard the message from these private investigators all 3 times, that I loved her, that I thanked her, that I was forever grateful to her, that I considered her my hero. And she did die just about a week after that. But she did die knowing that she had a daughter, because she had no other children. She died knowing that she had 4 granddaughters, and she died knowing that she had grandchildren. And I often wrestled with, God, why did you make me go through all this? And my husband tried to constantly remind me that maybe this wasn't about me, but it was about the gift that God was giving to her before she died. And I did work through that dark season. It was not easy. I still have moments of wrestling with God on those unanswered questions. But I have worked through. I'm so thankful. There was a time I couldn't even say the word rape or rejection. I can say those words now, but knowing I have definitely come to that place that I can say I am not the echo of that sin-soaked violence that brought me into this world. I am the echo of sacred value, that I am a daughter of the King, made in the image of God. And that took about 2 years to get to that place of being able to say that and really believe it. And I just, like I said, it's a season. I also see it as, it was the deepest wound of my life these past couple of years. But now my prayer is that as I've gained strength through that wound, and that wound is no longer oozing and bleeding all over, that it's a wound that God can use as a well of hope for others. Because others that are in the raw state of their wounds, to say there is hope, that God is there. He sees you. He is with you. He is sitting with you right there in the ashes of your pain. And this pain will be used for good, for your good and for his glory. It doesn't mean it'll feel good, but it will be used for good.
Of that, Niemah, let's real quick rewind back to that first audio recording. After years of understanding where you came from and the odds that were stacked against you, being with Pete and Dixie, and then finding out that you were a product of rape, and then this yearning to want to meet your mother, your birth mother, only to get rejected and not understanding why. And then you get this audio recording that validates everything that you ever wanted from this woman that you love and that you were seeking love from. That is such a miraculous part of this story that I just don't want to overlook, because you found it, you got to feel her love. And
Yes.
gosh, it's unbelievable what God's done
Yes.
in your life.
Yeah. That was a moment God spoke to me in that one utterance. Oh, that's it. It doesn't take a lot.
How often do you play that? Do you listen to that often?
Yes, I haven't marked the timestamp, and because the rest of it is painful. But that goes to show that God can show up in our deepest pain. He can show up in the smallest whisper. And sometimes it's in a way we could never imagine, but he shows up.
Love it, Niemah. This story is just miraculous. That's literally the word that I want to use. It's a miraculous story against all odds. Niemah, let's end with this. So, what would you like to say, or how would you like to encourage somebody else that seemingly is stacked against the odds, whatever the case may be? The odds are against them to find success. The odds are against them to rid a life of crime. The odds are against them to, get out of a difficult circumstance or a difficult geographical location. What would you offer them as far as words of hope?
Wow. We live in a world that is broken. It is broken, and there is so much pain, and there's so much hopelessness. But we also have a God of miracles. And it is in our darkest times. Often it's in the times when we feel unseen, when we don't see God, that he is doing some of his greatest work. And there are no limits to his divine intervention, orchestration, his miraculous hand upon each one of us. And we just have to look for God in the miracle and look for him to do those miracles, because we can't do any of it on our own. We can't. We do not have the strength.
Yeah, so good. God is so good. His blessings, sometimes like in your story, Niemah, you have to tune in and you have to trust, even when it feels heavy or hurtful. He will still provide just a blip of an audio recording or a blip of some blessing that you're looking for. And that is the God that we serve. And I'm so grateful, Niemah, for you, for your story, for the unbelievable resilience that you've demonstrated throughout the entirety of your life, and then how you give God the glory for all that he's done. I want to thank you so much, Niemah, for coming and telling this story on the Recovery Couch.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure's mine. I hope everybody enjoyed this recording as much as I did. This is an unbelievable testament, and I just know this will reach so many people. So this is a message of hope, and we continue to do that here on the Recovery Couch. And I want to remind everybody that you always have a place right here on the Recovery Couch. Thank you.